Hi, everybody. My name is Trevor Muir, and Lou sent me an email just a little bit ago and asked if I would send you a message to help you kick off your year. And of course, I said yes, because there's not much else to do when you live in the epicenter of the polar vortex in Michigan, where I live this time of year, especially during a pandemic. And so I thought I'd take a few minutes and just share a little story with you and maybe put some of the pieces together. And whatever you want to do with that story is up to you. But I'm really excited to get to connect with you on the other side of our great continent during a very strange and weird and tumultuous and challenging time that is full of unknowns, but then also treasures that are hidden in the midst of all of it. And so I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But first, I want to share a little story with you. I started off as a high school teacher. Now I spend some time working at a university with future teachers at a college, but then I spend a lot of time traveling around and working with teachers and educators and future professionals and at Paul Mitchell schools and all over the place. That's what I'm doing a lot of now. But when I was a high school teacher, I got into the work because I deeply wanted to be a part of my students' lives. I wanted to, I had this one teacher when I was in 6th grade. His name was Mr. Peters, and he had this tremendous impact on who I was when I was a 12-year-old boy going through a tough divorce with my parents, undergoing lots and lots of trauma. He was somebody that had a major impact on my life. And so I was like, this is what I want to do with my students. And so every day I showed up to school with everything I had. And there was lots of energy coming from me. And I had a lot to give. And I would put in time with kids during school, after school. I would give kids rides home. The work that I was doing was bigger than the paycheck. It was bigger than, I just need stability so I have a job. It was bigger than my love of what I was teaching. Yeah, I liked English and history and some of the things I teach, but it was bigger than that. Perhaps some of you can relate to that. Perhaps, you have interest in beauty and hair and self-care, but there's probably something bigger than that, and that's why you're currently an educator in this industry, or you're an advisor to future professionals, or you're a leader at a school. Well, that's what it was for me. And so I had this mission every day that I would go and show up for my students. And I remember one day I was walking down the hallway, and I saw two kids standing there talking to each other, and they were both my students, and they didn't see me walking by, and I heard one of them say, I've got Mr. Muir's class next. And then the other student he heard his friend say, I've got Mr. Muir's class next. And the other student goes, oh, God, I hate that guy. There's a lot of things that can beat you down as an educator, right? There are a lot of things that can pull you down and make you feel the weight of your job and your career choice. Whether it's the pressures, whether it's frustrations, whether it's the pay, whether it's pandemics. There are so many things that can make this work difficult. But for me, especially as a young teacher who wanted to give everything he had to his students, to hear that one of them, without any prompting, told his friend that he hates me, to me, that's the worst. And it really did its number on me. Because I didn't get into this work to be hated. I got into this work to help students' lives change and transform. And so I all of a sudden had this mission on my hands. I was like, you know what? This kid doesn't like me. I'm going to make sure he likes me. And so I showed up to class with extra energy for this kid. And I poured more of my time and more of my space and capacity into this kid. And you know what he did in response to that? He seemingly hated me more. He kept his head on his desk more. He turned in less assignments. He always had this growl in his voice. He hated me. And he said it. He was a punk. And it was difficult being this kid's teacher. It was difficult being an educator knowing that this kid despises me. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And it beat me down. And I wish that this story ended that fall, that end of that semester, at the end of that school year, where I could say, you know what, but then he turned it around, and all of a sudden all of my the fruits of my labor made it all worth it. But that isn't how that story ended that year. He left my class hating me. And it hurt. It stung. It's like, wait a minute, you bleed. You can't be everything to everyone. And sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you work, you can't change someone's opinion of you. And this was a tough pill to swallow, because this isn't why I did this work. This isn't why I signed up for it. And so I kind of carried that kid's story with me for a long time. Perhaps you've had a similar situation to this, where you've invested over and over into somebody, whether it's a family member or a friend or a student, a future professional, and you've put all this into them, and yet they dropped out anyway. Or they didn't all of a sudden turn the corner and start understanding that you actually care about them. Or whatever it is, you put in this labor and there was no fruit. And so maybe you can relate to this. And so a few years went by, and obviously, pain gets dull over time. And so I started kind of forgetting about this instance, but I could recall it on the spot if anybody asked me, have you ever been hated by a student? And so I went about my life and I went about my career, and then a few years later, probably 5 or 6 years later, I got a Facebook message, one of those message requests. And so it's somebody that doesn't actively follow you on Facebook. They're trying to get in touch. And so I get a message request, and I go and open it, and it's that student. And I just see it's his name. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Like, I'm about to get the ire of this person years later. I mean, those things sometimes happen. I'm like, oh, I don't even want to read this. And so you know what I did? I didn't even open his message. I was like, I don't feel like the negativity right now. And so I just kind of let it sit in the inbox for a week. Does anybody else ever let emails sit and simmer for a time? Yeah, me too. And so I sat with it for a little bit. And then one day I was like, all right, I'm going to open this. So I go and click on this kid's email. And it says something along the lines of this. It says, Dear Mr. Muir, you probably don't remember me, but I was in your class a few years back, and man, did I give you a hard time. I wasn't cool with you. I hated you. I disrespected you. I did all of that. But I'm finally coming to terms with the childhood that I had, and I realized I was an angry kid, and I was taking it out on you. And every day you kept showing up and caring for me, no matter what I threw at you. And I just want you to know that I'm figuring things out around here, and I appreciate all that you did for me. And so when I got this message from this kid, it floored me. I mean, it was a couple lessons that came in there. One lesson, this kid didn't hate me. This kid was angry, and I caught the brunt of it, right? Like this kid didn't actually hate me. He hated his circumstances in life, and I happened to be that figure that caught it. And the second lesson I learned is that my consistency, the fact that despite the way that I was treated, I kept showing up. Yeah, I had to take care of myself. Yeah, sometimes you've got to cut off people who are doing you harm, and you've got to protect yourself before you can actually help them. And so that's all true, but the fact is I kept showing up to this kid, believing that he can turn a corner. Yes, I wanted him to turn that corner when I was still his teacher, but it happened years later. But the fact is, continuing to show up with that consistency does have an impact, and that's third point. The third point is sometimes our role as leaders and educators is to plant seeds, and we can water them. We can make sure that they get all the nutrients they need. We can make sure that they get put out in the sunlight, but we cannot make them grow. And sometimes we plant those seeds and we go on to other things, or they go on to other things, and we don't see what they grow into. I mean, it's only because this kid could find me on Facebook, and then I happened to see a message request, that I even found out what happened with his story down the road. So many times we don't get that notification. And so instead, what we have to do is just trust that the work that we're putting into it, the work of gardening and sowing those seeds, is worth it. And what they grow into is out of our control. What you do with your future professionals right now, yes, can have an immediate impact. But you also have to trust that the work that you're doing now is going to have a long-lasting impact, an impact that goes way beyond the time that your students are in your studio, that are in your classroom, that are in your school. And so you got to trust that. And you also have to trust that consistency is worth it. With that student, despite the fact of how he showed up to class, despite what his outward posture was, I continued to teach the way that I knew best. I kept using best practices. I learned things as a teacher up until that point that I know works. that are research proven, that were proven by the institution I was working for, that these things work. And so despite the way that he showed up, I kept showing up with the best way of doing things. I kept knowing that, you know what, I am still going to do class this way. And I am not lowering my expectations just because you don't like my class. And I'm still going to teach this way. And yeah, I'm going to adjust and iterate and make changes as needed, but I'm going to continue to do the things that I know work. And that's what I did. And I was blessed years later to find out that it was worth it, that the object of my toil grew into something. This kid is now an entrepreneur. He's started his own company and it's working. And he says it's all because of me. Now, I know the truth here. That kid already was capable before he came into my classroom. He already had this potential. I didn't make him into the dynamic person that he is. He already had that. I just pointed it out to him. I kind of shined a spotlight onto who he is and what he's capable of. And because I did that, he was able to flourish. You are having the same role in your students' lives. You have this opportunity to enter their stories and give them things that they wouldn't get otherwise. And so know this today. Know that you are having a lasting impact on your students. Know that the work you are putting in during this stupid pandemic that has been challenging, that has been full of unknowns, that is just continuing to throw obstacle after obstacle in your way, the work you are doing in spite of all of that is worth it. And so, my friends, I hope that you believe that right now as we are at the beginning of this year, as we've got a lot of unknown ahead of us, that you can continue to find ways to enter your students' lives and make learning memorable and successful and effective and lasting for your students. So thanks so much that I got to share this little message with you. My sincere hope is that this pandemic will wane pretty soon for lots and lots of reasons, but one of them is I would love nothing more than to leave the polar vortex that I live in and come out west and visit you all in person and get to work with your future professionals as they work alongside you. So I would love for that to happen at some point, but for now, please let me know if there's any other ways that I can support you. And thank you for the work you're doing with your future professionals and the lives of your coworkers, which all will have a huge, tremendous benefit on the rest of the society that they all exist in. So grace and peace, my friends. Hopefully we can connect soon.